let's get right into the topic. The first topic. We're going to talk a little bit about debt. Why is it a taboo? Is it a friend or foe? Is debt bad? I personally I think that, debt is kind of like something it's a financial instrument that can be um good or bad depending on how you use it, but it's so misunderstood and so misinformed in the sense that people fear the unknown. So what do you think, Stephanie?
Oh, okay. So coming from the property industry, it really depends on the person. And I realized that from my experience, the wealthier the person is, the more they like that. And those that are, at the middle income level or the lower middle income level, they are more a bit of afraid of, or and different reasons than how the rich or the wealthy uses that. So in the property sector, you get to use debt like in the form of mortgage, which is what some gurus say is using other people's money to build wealth, to buy even more property, not just one, but two, three, and then so on and more, whereas,
Mhm.
yeah. So I think in the property industry, it's more like a friend if you know how to use it well.
Definitely. I
But
would
if
say
not,
like
consequences, yeah, you'll end up having your property repossessed and having to go onto auction property lah,
I
auction
see.
market. Yeah, yeah,
I like how you came from a property point of view, because in like equities and crypto, right? Usually that comes in the form of leverage, which me and Aaron we are very familiar with, and that's why we kind of like don't touch it. But you hear stories about people getting wiped out. You hear people getting margin called and ended
yeah.
up having to pay like more than three times of whatever they actually initially borrowed of. But yeah, Aaron, what do you think about that? Coming from the equity side of things.
Um, you see, the thing about I think what Stephanie touched on today, because she's from the property sector, right, is that a lot of people in property tend to use leverage because in most cases, hard property is a pretty big purchase object, lah. And in most people's personal finance, right, when you talk about property purchase, it tends to take up about 30 to 40% of your cash flow every month to buy a home. And I think what Steph says is pretty right, and that is if the richer you are and the wealthier you are, right, you tend to actually take on more debt to ensure that you can control more assets, rather than using your own money. Because generally when you are wealthier, right, what usually happens is that financial institutions start to open up very custom and tailor-made products for you, right, in order for you to leverage. So most cases when you go to a bank, and actually we'll save this for a topic later, to answer the question, I would say that from my understanding, right, and my observation is that in most cases, all greatest fortunes in the world, right, the greatest fortunes in the world have both been made and destroyed using debt. So whenever you look at this debt equation, there's always a creditor and there's always a debtor, and there is always a winner at the end of the equation, because when you create debt, right, there is someone using it and there's someone collecting. The question is, in this game of debt, right, if you are the person using debt, can you create more value than whatever the person is charging? That's really the main question that you have to answer. And if the answer is yes, then it becomes a friend. But if the answer is no, if you're struggling paying off like minimum sums, for credit card, you're like stretched to the max, you're owing like credit cards like 6 months, 8 months of your annual income, of your monthly income, right? And then you are just paying bare minimum, then it becomes a very huge foe lah. Then it's very, very hard to get out of. Yeah.
It ties back to just very good personal finance, right?
Yeah,
In the
pretty much
sense.
like yeah, pretty much like I would say that and we'll talk about this later in the few topics later, and that is that always comes back to your personal finance in the beginning stages of your wealth building. But then as you start to mature, once you start to get wealthier, as what Steph says, right, then it's no longer about just personal finance. You're actually looking at that, right, as a instrument in finance, right, to actually grow your wealth larger, because that allows you to take on more projects, bigger projects. And then you also talk about risk management, like how do you like use that not just in your personal capacity but in a bigger scale, you see.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with what you say, provided we have the skills and knowledge to use it, right?
Yeah, and in most cases, what I've noticed is that wealthy people, Even if let's say they don't have the skills and knowledge, they can always find people who know how to do it. Then they'll pay for usually like consultants, and you'll just pay for the people who are good at it. Then
Mm.
that's why they build an organization. Then they have a CFO. Then the CFO will be the one handling all this like financial matters. Usually in a very huge like corporation, or even like wealthy, like the upper echelons of like wealth management, right? Usually the family office, there's always a few people, right, who are very, very good at looking at financial instruments, and that's how they manage the debt. So coming back to the question, is it friend or foe, or is it bad? I would say that the biggest destructions of wealth that I've seen, right, tends to come from, people who overextended and over leverage. We see a lot of examples in the last 2 weeks in the crypto space through the Terra ecosystem, right? People like borrow a lot of money, and they really overextended, and then unfortunately, they nothing to laugh about lah, but they did lose fortunes, and it's very, very hard to come back from. It's very hard to come back from owing large sums of money, I would say. So I think end of the day, this is why we want to talk about the topic, because we feel that it needs to be there needs to be a spotlight in knowing how to utilize this instrument. And Ryan is very right in saying that it's a very taboo subject, because I think it's not in the Southeast Asian culture to actually want to always talk about I owe tang or I owe money, right?
Yeah, it's not something you actually bring up to the table during your family gathering or something.
Yeah, and usually people don't educate each other on this, if you
Yes,
notice.
definitely. It's a very misinformed sector of like finance, I would say. For
Yeah.
like what Stephanie mentions just now, the lower and middle income families, they tend to fear debt a little more, which I think like this kind of like financial education on like debt would serve these people well. What do you think about that, Stephanie?
People avoiding debt actually brought consequences to themselves, which is quite not of advantage consequences. Like if you never borrow or if you never get into debt, how are you able to build a credit profile for yourself so that in the future where you really want to buy a house, how are banks gonna evaluate you? How are they gonna assess whether you are a good paymaster or not? So I find that excessively avoiding debts are bad as well. But however, having said that, for those first timer, there's actually a lot of tools available online to actually gauge how much debt you can get, or to look at your affordability, your eligibility. So you can easily go to Property Guru website to look for those calculator where you get to calculate your affordability, your eligibility before you really decide to take on the debts.
Definitely, there's so many tools online today that can help you decide whether you can or cannot take on debt.